Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Aubrey Robinson, and thank you for joining NAMI-NYC's public education event when you care about someone experiencing suicidal thoughts. Suicidal thoughts can be difficult and isolating for both the person experiencing them and their loved ones. That's why we're here tonight, to learn how to recognize warning signs, have open conversations, and connect to resources to help us through recovery. This conversation is for family members, friends, caregivers, colleagues, and community members who want to better understand how to support someone they care about while also caring for themselves. We're honored to have Dion C. Monsanto as our moderator tonight. She is a grief coach, best-selling author, and founder of Joyous Ocean. After losing her teenage daughter, Seaway, to suicide, Dion transformed her grief into purpose. Joining Dion in conversation are incredible advocates and experts with lived experience. Mara Stansky, a longtime suicide prevention advocate who has facilitated peer support groups for both suicide loss survivors and individuals living with suicidal ideation. Leah Smith, a family caregiver whose journey supports her son through bipolar disorder, psychosis, and suicidal crises. John Cornelius, a veteran father and suicide prevention specialist in Missouri who is a loss and attempt survivor. And finally, Shannon Donick, founder and CEO of Pillar, Peer Support After Suicide, a volunteer-driven organization providing peer-led support after a suicide. And to tell you a little bit about us, NAMI-NYC has been providing free education, support, and advocacy for families and individuals affected by mental illness for over 40 years. Our programs are always free, confidential, and open to anyone who needs them. NAMI-NYC also has mental health support groups for peers and family members affected by suicide, including living with thoughts of suicide, supporting loved ones with suicidal thoughts, and suicide loss survivors. I will drop those links in the chat for anyone interested. If you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, you can call, text, or chat 988 to connect to the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. You can also connect to them at 988lifeline.org. Trained crisis counselors are available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Your feedback is very important to us. Towards the end of the event, we will share a short survey in the chat. Please take a few minutes to complete it, as it helps us improve events. If you experience any technical issues, please let us know in the chat, and we'll do our best to assist you. If you have any questions during the presentation, please place them in the chat, and we'll revisit them during the Q&A portion. I'll keep a document of them on the side so we can get through as many as possible at the end. Thank you all again for being here. Without further delay, let's turn this over to our moderator, Dion C. Monsanto.
Thank you so much, Aubrey, and thank you all for being here. It's been wonderful watching your shares in the chat and noticing where everybody is coming from. We have East Coast, West Coast, and international. So we're covering the country, the world. We are global citizens. And because of all the names that have come into the chat and where everyone is from, I just want to hold space for some of the names that have come in, for your sons, for yourselves, for people that are living with suicidal thoughts and ideations. And for me, and holding space for them, I feel like we want to breathe them into the space. So looking at the names, reading them, and sharing with them. And I'll read some of them out loud. I saw, Alex, I put in Seaway, Annie, Missy, Jennifer's son, Sonathan, and we have people like Kent, England, Miguel's in the Bronx. So I love that we're coming in from everywhere. But once we bring up that so many people are living with so many challenges around suicidal thoughts, I think we all just need to pause and take a few deep breaths to bring ourselves into the room, to bring our loved ones into the space, whether they're still with us or they're only here in spirit. I have with me, my daughter's behind me in spirit. I also have pictures of her. So wherever you are, I invite you just to take a deep breath. I love closing my eyes when I do that. I tend to put a hand on my heart and on my belly, and we'll just take 3 deep breaths together before we move on. Pull air in And you might even sigh it out. 2 more times. Inhale and exhale. Last time together. Pull air in, hold it in. And then exhale, sigh it out. I don't know about you, but that definitely made me feel better and brought my energy physically and mentally into the space and eased some of the nerves. Even though I've been on this journey for a while, I'm still nervous every time I come into the space with so many beautiful people, spirits, and energies that we're talking about. Now, you've heard a little bit about our wonderful panelists, and I'm just going to immediately start with questions so we can dive right in. Now, I'm going to throw a question out for everyone, and you just let me know. Whoever wants to start, you start. Many people really struggle with how to start a conversation when they notice somebody they love might be thinking about suicide. What is one way to approach these difficult conversations? And what should you do if your loved one shuts down or they're resistant? Who wants to start? Y'all know I'll call a name. I'll see who Elmo's pointing at. So,
I can jump in just because I feel like you gave us such a great way to start by having us all start with taking a deep breath. I always think that, before you even say anything, I always think it's important to just try to, if you can, if this is a planned conversation, if you're able to make sure to slow yourself down first, right? Because if you're concerned about someone that you really care about, that's nerve-wracking. That's scary. Like you're probably really, really scared about how this person is this person in a healthy space. So your mind is going to start racing right away because this is such a high stakes conversation. So I always think it's if you can, if this is a planned conversation, I know sometimes these come up quite quickly, so you might not have a moment, but if you can just take a few breaths, just kind of try to center yourself just like you did for us, Dan. I think that's always just a good way. And even I know for myself, if you already can't tell, and we're talking late, I tend to speak really, really fast. So these are reminders for myself too, as I'm talking with someone, just to kind of like, calm yourself back down. And then, I'm curious to hear what kind of language other people use, but I think it's really just if just jumping right in. If you're this is a person who's close to you, and there's probably some behaviors or maybe some words that they've used that's had you, started having things spin around in your own mind of like, I'm wondering if this person is thinking about suicide or is thinking about killing themselves. You might just go ahead and start there, where I've noticed a few times you're not quite yourself. It seems like things that we used to do together, it just isn't, bringing you the same joy or whatever it is. If this is someone that you're close to, you may have noticed some behavioral changes, or you might have even started hearing them say certain things like, it's just, I'm not, I'm not worth it or something like that. And so you could bring up that you've noticed that, and just by sharing that, that you have been attentive enough to notice this might actually help them feel seen and help them feel like they can open up to you and start sharing a little bit.
I love that. Thank you for starting us off. And then I did see John raise his hand as you started.
Right. I was just going to echo some of what Shannon shared in the trainings that I've taught in the past. We try to remove as much weight from that conversation as possible and tell the attendees to think about maybe the 10 or 15 people in their immediate life instead of the whole world, right? Because these are the people that you like, you love, you spend the most time with, you work with them, you live with them, and you're going to notice those changes. And that's that opportunity, to say, well, that was weird. Hey, why'd you say that?
Mm,
Right? Or what did you mean by that? And then if the response is, well, I'm in a dark place and so on and so forth, then that's the opportunity to say, hey, are you thinking about suicide? Do you need help? And
Nice.
that's a very abbreviated version of the conversation, and then to remove even more weight of that conversation, because a lot of people have that angst of what do I say? I always try to teach that sometimes you don't need to say anything. You just need to sit in the space with them for a minute.
That's such an important statement. Thank you. Go for it, Leah.
I would add to that just that there's no perfect way, one way to ask the question and to ask people if they have thoughts of suicide. And to get too hung up on exactly how should I say it. The important thing is that you ask questions and are prepared to listen and sit with them, as John said.
Yeah, and I
Thank you.
think to that point, it can be such a shame-filled experience for people that I think using really direct language and using, not trying to couch what you're saying and be subtle, being really upfront about what you've been noticing and what your concerns are can be really helpful in reducing some of the shame and prevent the difficulties in people talking about that, because we don't talk about this enough, and we're taught that it's something you shouldn't talk about. And so allowing someone a space and acknowledging that maybe it's not you, and that's not anything to about your relationship with the person. It's just that someone else in their life might be someone that they can confide in about this more openly, and helping them identify who those people are can go a long way.
No, I love everything you all said. And I think the only thing I would love to add is that, of course, and I think everyone listening and watching the replay, make sure it's private. We really want to respect their confidentiality and have that conversation in private. And, sometimes we feel like things go without saying, but I want to call that forward, that have a private conversation with them. And in the same way we took a deep breath, you might even let them know, I'm so nervous, but I care about you so much. I'm gonna tell you something that might make you mad at me, but I love you enough to screw this up because you're that important. Um, Now, Shannon, when I think about, your work at Pillar, I'm so proud of you in founding that too. You have supported both loss and attempt survivors. So what role do you feel peer support plays in healing?
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, it kind of even just starts with where kind of like jumping off of what Mars was saying, where this can be such in both cases, whether you have lost someone to suicide, or you've attempted suicide, or you're thinking about someone who is having those thoughts, or quite frankly, we see a lot of both, right? We see a lot of folks who are both attempt survivors and loss survivors, and there can be various, whether it's shame, whether it's trauma, whether it's a lot to carry. And as we've already even mentioned, there's a lot of those around us just don't know necessarily how to support us. People are often trying, but it might just not be quite the right fit. And so sitting with someone who's a peer, who has been right there with that person, right? They've been in their shoes. So that just kind of just automatically brings a comfort level to someone, especially if it's a newer loss survivor or a newer attempt survivor, where they're still kind of like, the world has changed and they're still kind of like trying to figure out what this new normal is going to look like. Also, they might still be looking for where can they find support. They might still be looking for where can I find a therapist? Where can I find a support group? So by speaking with a peer who's maybe been in this space for a little bit of time, who's already kind of, maybe they talked to someone, who helped guide them, and now they can pass that on to this new person. It's such an invaluable experience to be able to talk to someone where it's like, oh, wow, I can just kind of like, this person just gets it. I can just jump right into shorthand speak. I don't have to over explain myself, because they know what I'm saying when I say, this is how it feels today. And this is not to take away, as I already mentioned, like therapy is so important for this group. This is it almost always goes hand in hand with trauma. So you definitely
Mhm.
want to speak with a mental health professional, a therapist, a clinician, someone who can guide you through, more of like a medical space. But that's a different dynamic, right? That's an important dynamic, but it's someone who is in an authority position. So it's going to be a different kind of conversation. That peer just really it's two people who have been through something that feels like no one else gets it. And now we're sitting together and we just get right to it.
Yeah, that lands it. And what I hear from both questions, actually, for what you said, Shannon, and what we heard before, is that in all of it, it's a safe space. So with therapy, there may be a hierarchy with the position of authority, but with peers, it's lateral. You're looking to your right and left, and that person makes you feel seen and heard in the same way we'd have that conversation. Thank you for that. John, what are some of, well, you're a veteran and a suicide prevention specialist, and you've seen the importance of the cultural context in this work, especially with Indigenous communities. How do you feel culture shapes the way we talk about and address suicide?
Uh, Cultural appreciation in a community is vital when we're addressing suicide and mental health crisis. Because from to community, there's similarities, but each is its own living ecosystem, right? Depending on who's there. Uh, for my own experience, specifically growing up on the Pine Ridge Reservation
Mhm.
as a Lakota, we say Mitakuye Oyasin. We are all related.
Hmm.
And so to have such a high suicide rate is really contrary to a core value to being Lakota. And what that means basically is community is the antidote for isolation, which is one of the many observable causational factors leading up to suicide. And that's true in any cultural setting, right? Considering a person's worldview is vital to bridging that gap when delivering mental health services. And in Lakota way of life, there is no word or ceremony for suicide. It's a completely foreign practice to our way of life,
Hmm.
and it's destroying our future. And I echo the elders in that previous statement. I go back occasionally to help do work towards building a peer support program in a couple of schools. But as a veteran on the reservation, it's difficult to receive services because the last time I was home, I learned that the VA opened a clinic on the reservation, but it's only open for limited hours, like
Hmm.
once or twice a month. And the Veterans Homeless Shelter had been closed, and there is no transportation program for veterans on the reservation to make the 160-mile round trip to go to their appointments. And for
Access to
non,
care, yeah. Access to care seems to be something that happens in a lot of places, but thank you for sharing that. I
yeah,
interrupted. Go ahead.
oh yeah, no, and just to bridge the cultural gap there, the same is true in an agricultural community. Isolation, distance from resources, it's the same issue. Um, and for non-veterans, the IHS behavioral health clinic is short staffed. They're staffed by 3 people. They manage a high caseload every month. So it answers the question that I asked at a conference last year when Native American suicide statistics were presented, and I said, if we all know where the highest statistics are, why are there no services there?
Hmm. Hmm.
And the presenter said, I don't know. And a lot of people don't know. And so it's been my mission to raise the cultural flag and say, hey, this is happening to my people and we need help. And I'll just repeat, community is the antidote to hopelessness.
Thank you. I love that. And I didn't write down how you say it, but I did write down we are all related. And everybody, when they spoke, hinted at some of the things we might see. So I'm going to take it a step back and ask everybody, whoever wants to start, what are some of the warning signs of suicidal thoughts that people might miss? And how can loved ones recognize them sooner?
I think, acknowledging that someone is isolating themselves more. There might be, a myriad of reasons for that, but I think recognizing that that is, not predictive of suicidal ideation, but maybe a warning sign that something is going on that they're feeling might be difficult to talk to other people about. They're not feeling as connected, as I think John was talking really a lot about community. And if you're separating yourself from your community, there's probably a reason for that.
Mhm.
And I would just add, at least the words I was hearing from my son have been, I can't keep going on feeling like this. And you hear that once, you hear it twice, and you really don't want to hear it again, and you want to get more information. Yeah.
Definitely. So I hear hopelessness, isolation, tired. I don't want to feel like this anymore. Um, and as long as I feel like they're talking about it, we can offer suggestions, and listen to them and really acknowledge. I think the listening, everyone has echoed that as well, to sit with our discomfort as the loved one for that person, listen to them, and when they're ready, offer support. Does anyone want to add what else they might be saying? Because we talked about talk, we talked about things that they've said, and I feel like their behavior, the isolation is one thing. Go ahead, I see it, John.
Yeah. In my own case, I have a lot of injuries from military service. I broke my back and I hurt my neck and my knee, shoulder, and I moan and groan a lot. I'm 6'4", 200 pounds. It takes a long time to stand up, and I stopped doing that.
Mm.
I stopped complaining about it.
And was that a sign for you when you
Hmm.
stopped complaining?
Hmm.
Okay. That's good to know. So you were suffering in silence.
Hmm.
Thank you for that. I would not have thought of that one. That was truly helpful.
Yeah. So and that's for, people live in chronic pain, things like that.
Hmm. And everyone also hinted at access to care, and the isolation and being silent. So I hear that. Chris and Leah both talked about what their sons say. And so there might be that point of when they stop saying something, to what you just said, John, that's a sign that we would be concerned about. Thank you. So, Leah, you mentioned your son, and want to ask you, you've been with your adult child through several crises, as well as hospitalizations. What do you say to parents or caregivers who feel scared to ask their child directly about suicidal thoughts or even hallucinations?
I guess what I would say, because in my case, once I was finally brave enough to broach the question, do you have thoughts of hurting yourself? That the relief my son felt, like his physical body, like he took such a sigh and was so, appreciative, and relieved to have that word be spoken in his presence and be asked that. So, I would say, as scary as it is, I think you'll see the positive, or at least in my case, the satisfaction, the good results, that I had asked the right question. And of course, being involved with NAMI and the support groups and the family class that they offer, all of that experience gave me the confidence to feel more comfortable with, the subject, and be able to mention suicide. I realized was going to take away from the stigma that action, that word has. and, you know, the stigma connected to having those thoughts, but bringing it out of the dark, basically, was the way to go.
Thank you for that. I do think, and a lot for all of you here that I'm looking at the presenters, the panelists, naming a thing is important, right?
Yeah,
So when
take
you
the
called it
power
out,
away, you know, right?
yeah, so your son felt that and you could physically see his relief when you asked him directly. And I think it's so important for all of our listeners to hear that from you as a mom. It's like, I didn't say, are you feeling okay today?
Right.
You know, you were direct with what are your thoughts are, and he expressed his relief. And those are important questions. I'm just going to add before I, move on to additional questions that sometimes those direct questions make all the difference. And it's not, how was your day? Are you feeling okay? And if you are really uncomfortable with that, in the same way, if you had to go make a speech, if you're going into your boss to ask for more money, you're going to practice in the mirror. So you might have to ask. So did you practice somewhere before you said it to him, Leah? You might not have. I'm just curious.
I don't think I did. I think though, over time, convinced myself how important it was, you know, and that I wasn't helping anybody, myself or my son, by ignoring that question, those words. You know, and I believe in,
What was the exact way that you asked the question?
do you, you know, he was referring to how miserable he felt. And I finally said, do you have thoughts of hurting yourself? Do you have thoughts of suicide? And he said, yes. And he even said, and I then said, do you have a plan to do that? And he said, yes. And we all sat there. And interestingly enough, I mean, we weren't in public. You mentioned earlier, Dion having a private conversation, but my husband was there, and I knew it was a question, frankly, that he wouldn't be comfortable asking about. And I felt that it was important that he heard this because it made it open for all of us. It wasn't just the secret between myself and my son, this secret reality of his thoughts. And I think that was helpful also in retrospect. I don't know that I knew it then, but
Mm. No, that is truly important. And I love that. And I love the question that it's a very specific question. And for me, I asked you that because I had to practice it. I had to look in the mirror and think, oh my God, I'm going to have to say this to my child. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? Um, to really just say it to them. And please keep the questions coming. We're going to have lots of space for questions at the end. So if you want to type some of your questions in the chat, we promise we will get to them.
you know, he was referring to how miserable he felt. And I finally said, do you have thoughts of hurting yourself? Do you have thoughts of suicide? And he said, yes. And he even said, and I then said, do you have a plan to do that? And he said, yes. And we all sat there. And interestingly enough, I mean, we weren't in public. You mentioned earlier, Dion having a private conversation, but my husband was there, and I knew it was a question, frankly, that he wouldn't be comfortable asking about. And I felt that it was important that he heard this because it made it open for all of us. It wasn't just the secret between myself and my son, this secret reality of his thoughts. And I think that was helpful also in retrospect. I don't know that I knew it then, but
Mm. No, that is truly important. And I love that. And I love the question that it's a very specific question. And for me, I asked you that because I had to practice it. I had to look in the mirror and think, oh my God, I'm going to have to say this to my child. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? To really just say it to them. And please keep the questions coming. We're going to have lots of space for questions at the end. So if you want to type some of your questions in the chat, we promise we will get to them. Moving to Mars. You've led peer support groups for people that are living with suicidal ideation, and including the LGBTQ plus youth. Now, how have you addressed the unique challenges in this community and what they face?
Yeah, so thank you. So yeah, I think the way that we discuss suicidal ideation, as it relates to sexual and gender identity, especially for young people, is really important in the language we use and making sure that our language is supportive and respectful of that identity. And that's a really great place to start when you want to initiate or continue the conversation with the person when discussing, ideation that they have expressed to you. So I believe that, paying attention to how we communicate about that identity and their ideation can make a huge difference in creating an opportunity, to open the communication and ensuring that those conversations are well received by, both parties trying to have that conversation. And so for LGBTQ youth experiencing suicidal ideation, it can be extremely isolating to access support when it doesn't consider and respect your intersecting identities. So rather than thinking that these youths are at risk because of their identity, I want to challenge folks supporting LGBTQ youth to consider that these youth are at a higher risk because of the experience of societal norms and internal and external responses to their identity rather than their identity themselves. So we want to acknowledge that the way we talk about their identity can be supportive or alienating, especially for individuals, dealing with suicidal ideation and having those experiences. And it's really critical if you're looking to support someone to consider the different intersections that might be at play. So sexual and gender identity are not themselves risk factors for experiencing suicidal ideation, but they are, they can actually be protective factors. So when you acknowledge someone's identity fully, it allows them to access the community support that they might otherwise not have had access to or not been able to find. So it creates a safe environment for those young people and allows us to identify a variety of different types of support. And we need to also acknowledge that, not everyone's from the LGBT community. I say LGBT plus communities on purpose because not all of these individuals are in the same communities. There's it's not a monolith. There's a broad spectrum of identity that people are looking for support and resources. And so it's important to consider and really talk to someone and hear from them what their experience is rather than making assumptions. And I think we've really talked about the importance of using plain language and being really upfront about what you're saying. And I think, in addition to suicidal ideation, it can be really impactful to do that in a way around someone's gender and sexual identity. And I do just want to acknowledge that we need to, when considering this population, we need to recognize that the current political climate has created a great potential for fear and increased barriers that has disproportionately attacked the young LGBTQ plus members of our communities. And so for them, it's critical that we are speaking openly and creating opportunities for conversations for them to understand how the laws and regulations put forth by our political administration are impacting them and continuing that as an ongoing conversation since things are changing so fast and supports are being diminished on a grander scale for them. And I think we really need to be paying attention to that for the sake of our youths. Sorry, Dion, I think you're muted.
Thank you. It wouldn't let me.
Mhm.
What I would love, so thank you for that. And what it made me bring up is I failed to introduce, I normally bring in my pronouns because also when it comes to gender, when we're using our pronouns, it lets them know there are different ways to acknowledge us as safe people when we're asking and using the pronouns that they prefer. And that was definitely, it wasn't around when my daughter passed years ago, but something she would have loved,
Mhm.
not being misgendered if it were a conversation 15 years ago. So
Yeah, I really like the language used around that, identifying yourself as a safe person, making sure that people are able to, I see your pronouns in your name under Zoom, and, identifying that, okay, someone is acknowledging me, someone is like aware that, my face might not reflect my, like, what identity you're assuming of me, and that is important and can
yeah,
make a huge difference.
absolutely. Absolutely. There's so many different ways that we, as the people that love them, need to acknowledge and move through. And I'm gonna call this forward and then ask everyone to respond to another question that sometimes with the people we love, with the age difference or gender difference or whatever ways of being that we hold as open quote normal, what the society norms are, if they are different from our loved ones, that creates a friction. So in some way allowing that, because when I think of the cultural context for my family and being Caribbean, there were different ways of being that may or may not have been welcomed traditionally by the elders in my family that would make myself or my children feel uncomfortable. So different cultures have different things that may or may not be welcomed. And having said that, I want to ask everyone, all of the panelists, the boundaries. Like boundaries can be hard. Like when you're identifying, like I want to be known as XY, whatever it is. My daughter, my example, would change her name. So she'd want to be identified by a particular name, and that was important to her. And those boundaries can be hard when you care deeply about someone in crisis. Now, for each one of you, whoever wants to go first, how do you balance offering support and protecting your own mental health, your well-being, and there's the boundaries between both of you? How can you lean in to save a life and also protect yourself?
I will say
I think,
I'm a lost survivor of my uncle died by suicide, and my family was aware that this is, a realm I do spend a lot of time in professionally, and um, I was not considering my own mental health and my own caring for myself while supporting my family through that process. And I think it is, it feels to some of us feels really selfish
mm,
to put yourself first sometimes. And I think that that is something we really need to challenge, because it diminishes your capacity to be there long term, and it diminishes your ability to show up in the way that you want to show up. And it's really there's disappointment there when you can't show up because you've overextended yourself. And just so having that experience, it makes it a lot easier for me to put up those boundaries now, knowing that it is like a long-term goal of mine to be a support to the people in my community.
thank you for that.
Yeah, I could jump in from that just because I fully agree. I think it does take it might take some practice for you to so unfortunately it might be tough. You might have a few tough conversations with people that you care about before you quite exactly realize like what it is that is maybe going to be the thing for you. I even think about, I've been in this space for working with loss survivors and attempt survivors for years and years now. And I will say, when I first started, I was very reckless with my own time and my own self-care. And, that's such a buzzword. I know we all hear that, and we kind of, sometimes you can kind of even be like, what is self-care anymore? But what I encourage my volunteers who are speaking with peers, it took me a while to finally like start taking my own advice, but really, if you're going to have a conversation with someone and you're going to be exploring their thoughts in this way, there will be an energy exchange. You will just be, again, this is someone you care about, or even if it's, even if you're doing this work through a conversation like this, you of course begin to care about someone as you learn more of their story. So you end up taking a bit from what they're sharing, and so now you're carrying a bit of their a bit of their energy, a bit of their sadness, whatever it was that was weighing them, and it might land on you in a particular way. Some conversations might not, but some might, especially for those of us who are wearing our own multiple hats of loss survivor, attempt survivor, our own personal experience. Talking to someone whose story sounds very similar to ours, we might start reliving. And so, I always encourage folks to just be aware that that may come up. And so to try to come up with some sort of plan for yourself when you're done with that call, or when you're done with that, speaking with someone, whether it's, maybe it's time to go back to a support group for yourself. Maybe you call up your therapist, maybe just going for a walk, or just like, sometimes you just have to like shake everything off. But I mean, I always, when I'll have like my own therapist, like on speed dial for something like that, to just talk through right away afterwards. I also, and I'm sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but something that can be really helpful, I think, when we're setting boundaries, which is, again, I'm just thinking about the people who are on the call here who maybe are thinking about how they're going to take some of what we've talked about here tonight and have a conversation with someone. One of the easiest ways to set boundaries that I try to do right away is just be aware of your own expertise or lack thereof, quite frankly. I'm in this space and I have been for years, but I'm not a clinician. So I'm not a medical doctor. So I'm very, like, to me, that right there, if I'm thinking about things that my therapist has told me that I would want someone else to hear from a therapist, like, I'm not that person. So I'm going to make sure that if the conversation starts to turn in that way, I will be very clear to whoever I'm talking to and say, I want to support you. I want to be here for you. I want to hear all of this and listen with you. And then I'm going to refer you to continue this part of the conversation with someone who is trained, who's this is their expertise. So please don't feel like you need to solve every single thing that's going to come up in that moment, because no one can. We all need to have like John was saying, it's going to be a community of people who are helping someone through a crisis like this. So that helps me, knowing where I can do this part, I can't do this part. So I'm just going to help them find who that other person or other part would be.
Yeah, that access to care part is important, and supporting someone to finding appropriate access to care and acknowledging that the first person might not be your person. I know the first person and the second person were not the right people for me in terms of my therapy. So my example is, if you got to try on a few pairs of shoes, you might have to try on a few therapists as well. But having a community to help you find that person is important. And that self-care that you talked about in saying that I know this, I don't know that, I can hold this information, but then this information needs to be shared with the right person, and I'm not that person. That honesty is really good. Does anyone else want to share about boundaries?
No, Shannon said it, and Neon, you echoed it. Sometimes the boundary is I'm not the person to have that conversation. And I like to use an example of think of the person at work that just makes you grr. Sometimes maybe you had an interaction or something, or maybe your vibes just don't rub right together. But you're still with that person enough to know that, hey, they always park there, but now they're parking there. Or they always bring their own lunch and now they're ordering fast food. You'll notice those changes even though you don't have that interaction. And that's an opportunity to go to employee B over here and say, hey, I know you and so are really close, and I've noticed these things. Have you noticed anything? Maybe you could go talk to them.
I love that example, John, and how you built community in that specific example of you
Right.
not being the person to go directly to that person, but to say, like, I'm seeing this, are you seeing this? And then each of you engaging in that conversation. That is a great example. And we didn't mention it as a resource, but I love the Seize the Awkward campaign that some of you may be familiar with, where you'll see them personifying, and there'll be examples of each one of us as the caretaker, talking to the loved one. It's like, I don't know how to say this. This is really weird for me. I'm really uncomfortable. Naming the thing, naming the discomfort, naming the I want to be there for you. And if they say, people have mentioned it on the call and in the chat, seeing, I don't want to burden you with my problems. Your problems are my problems, and I wrote, what did I write down that John said? We are all related. So if you've got a problem, then I've got a problem. So we can engage in a conversation about our problems. If you're hungry, you know what? We're hungry. We're hungry.
Mhm.
So, and what those needs are. But I would definitely say the boundaries are was like, if I'm tired, you must be tired. You're working a lot of hours, whatever the thing is. And I think boundaries, I want to call this out for everyone. And I didn't prep y'all with this, so this is a surprise. I think boundaries are hard for people in general. Like sometimes you hinted at it, Shannon, if you're a giver, you're going to give, and you'll get to the point where you may feel depleted. And sometimes I'd say the little warning signs. So I remember speaking to someone, and they said, look, if you ever see my eyebrows are not looking right, there's something wrong with me if I haven't done this. Somebody else that's always into their nails, somebody else, the clothes are always ironed, and just whatever those things are, the differences, and leaning into that. Because each one of you be like, I saw this. Ah. As soon as you want to say, like, oh, it's nothing, say something, because your gut, each one of us, and I think within everyone's tradition, there's something about our inner knowing, our intuition that, everybody's heard the term, that gut feeling. Acknowledge your gut. Go ahead, Leah. Acknowledge your gut and trust that. Leah, yeah, you might have to bring Leah off mute.
Is and it's really hard as a parent, I think, in that role to be willing to hear the honest answer and not be like, you're not thinking of suicide, are you? Like, I don't want to hear that because, that would be so upsetting to me that I don't want you to talk about that. That doesn't do anybody any good. So really, when you do broach that subject or when you see signs and want to pursue them, to really be ready to hear something that might scare you.
I love how you modeled that, Leah. It's I guess in the court, you'd be like leading the witness. You're not thinking about this, right? You would never do that, right? You know, so it's not just how you ask, it's not what you ask, it's also how you ask.
Right.
And acknowledging that space and knowing that you could get a yes, and then what? Who do we call if they have a plan? How can you create a safe physical space for them? And who can you call to look into that? And I know Aubrey and Barbara will drop a number of those resources in the chat for you. But I think let me see if anybody else wants to add on about boundaries before I move into my next and last questions, and then we'll do a Q&A. All right. So people have hinted at it. We've mentioned some things and people have put questions in the chat that we'll come back to. But going around the room, asking everybody before we open it to our participants and hear their questions, what resources, what next steps would you recommend to these family members who are here today?
988. Got it tattooed on my arm. I have it splashed all over the back of my car. 988 is the go-to. If you don't know what to say or you're worried about what to say, if you have a phone or they have a phone, 988 will guide you through that conversation together. I always tell people go there first and they'll help you find that follow-up care, potentially if it's needed beyond that moment.
I love that, John. I love that you said you go. So you're not asking the person thinking about suicide to call. You are calling to guide, get help on how to support them. And that's something people are sometimes confused about. It's not that you have to tell that person in crisis to make a phone call. You're making the call so you know how to support them. And they've dropped some of that information in the chat. Thank you, Barbara. Who else wants to add on to that?
Yeah, I think, if you're looking up resources, and the ones I can think of off the top of my head for specifically LGBTQ individuals, the Trevor Project and the Trans Lifeline, they're, Samaritans of New York, they're great resources for both people helping someone through suicidal ideation and someone experiencing that suicidal ideation. And, to highlight what Dion was saying, it's people feel like you're taking, time away, or you're taking the services meant for someone experiencing suicidal ideation. And that is not true. Those services are there to support you in supporting your loved ones. And you have just as much right and need for accessing those. And a lot of the websites for hotlines also include additional resources and education materials. So, just going to those websites and looking up what is available can be really helpful.
Yeah, thank you for that. I absolutely agree. I can think of a couple. I'm gonna see what you say, Leah and Shannon, before I throw in mine. Go ahead, John.
Oh, I was going to say, do a local search with a mental health provider in your community about peer support groups.
Mm-hmm. I was going to bring up the text line because some people do not want to have conversations. You're going to want to text. And the crisis text line, 741-741, I found to be really helpful. I do have a college-age child, a young adult rather, living with me, and they've been able to use that number and share it with friends. And it felt good knowing that a 20-year-old felt empowered to share information with people that were having thoughts and could come and talk like, I'm concerned about my friend. This is what he has said. I'm not sure what I should do, and walk them through that and support them through that. So the crisis text line is very helpful in multiple languages as well. So if you're concerned about a language barrier, that would still be helpful. Go ahead, Shannon. I saw you.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say the same thing. I just wanted to take a moment to echo what everyone's saying, because I think I'm not sure if we got to it, but at the beginning you had asked, just what to do if someone is shutting down during this conversation, or gets to that point where they're, maybe they just didn't expect that we were going to get into so many, important and scary thoughts. So they're just not quite ready to go there with you. The crisis text line is ideal. I think we always talk about how you could be in a meeting at work and be texting someone, and they wouldn't, none of your coworkers would know. And so you're getting the support that you need in real time, and it's completely private. So I always think that's a great one. But I've watched, it looks like Aubrey and Barbara are putting so much in the chat that I think it's really, you don't want to show up with too many resources that might scare the person away that you're talking to. But I think it's great to have a few in your pocket, and then that way you're passing off something that you can trust. And also I just want to echo, just because I thought it was so important, and it really keeps coming up in this talk, is, as you said, Deanna, is just go ahead and practice for this, because it is, like this could be, you could hear some things that you might be nervous, that are potentially thoughts that your loved one is having, and just hearing them actually be stated in the moment might be just it's going to feel like something, and we want to be as as non-judgmental as possible. So we really want to take in that information without, without saying like, oh my gosh, like no big reactions. And so just to prepare ourselves, practicing the questions, making sure we have the resources we want to pass on. Maybe something, maybe it's like something that it's a number that they can call. So like I know NAMI has their lifeline or 988, having the crisis text line so they can reach out by text. And then also looking at maybe some support groups or some websites too.
Yeah, I love that. Did you want to add anything, Leah?
I was thinking of the book that I had gotten a lot of information from, just about creating a better trusting relationship with my loved one, my son in particular. I'm not sick, I don't need help. I mean, it's specifically about anosognosia, but within the book, there's the LEAP method, and you can either be reading the book or there are videos online that go through different dialogues that you can have to have a better trusting relationship. And somehow with a child, it's a trickier role to broach. So I just found a lot of what he talked about was very helpful. It's
Thank you so much for
not
that.
for a crisis situation, but just in general. Yeah.
No, thank you so much for that book recommendation. And that's something I remember very much. Some of us as care providers, as family members and, coworkers, colleagues, just we love somebody. You love hard, you love deep. And for some of us, it may look aggressive and be like, no, I need you here. I want you here. And leaning back and going, I'm going to hold the basket. Someone gave me an example before of literally, think of your laundry basket, folks. You got this big laundry basket, and you're like, you know what? I have this whole basket, dump everything in there. And if you're holding the basket as you listen to them, we talk about quite often in different trainings that community, talk, all these things are protective factors. But I got to tell you, listening is a forgotten skill. Listening can make such a big difference. Um, I was speaking somewhere and it was at a church in regards to suicide prevention, and the pastor came on after us. And I don't remember the pastor's name, but what he said, and you might have heard it before, you can type it in the chat if you know this one. It goes, God gave us one mouth and two ears so we can listen twice as much as we speak. And it was just an aha moment for me as someone that is a talker to zip it and listen. And that's a skill. And it sounds like the book you mentioned, I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help, would offer tools on how to listen, how to show up, the face, the energy, the body language. What does it look like? Listening is not just because I could keep my mouth shut and sit there like,
Right.
that's not good listening. So it's more than closing your mouth. It's really being a safe place and how you open your energetic body to receive the information and being prepared to offer love and to offer support. And even at the point what I will say to all of you listening here and in the replay, we've put out a lot of resources in this call, and we're going to talk some more as we listen to your questions. But you know what it's safe to say? I don't know, but we'll figure it out together. I heard something and a really wonderful thing. Um, Someone with the police department told me they use, because I'll offer, if you're talking to somebody and you be like, you know what? I went to this class, I went to this workshop, and they said XYZ. They said if a person starts behaving in this way, it could mean this. I don't know. What do you think about that? So, and just changing the conversation and offering it as a, wow, we all used to go out and now you don't go out. And they said it means that. What does it mean to you? There's just so many off the beaten path ways to start a conversation with a loved one that comes from, I just learned something new. in the same where you're like, oh my God, they're having a sale on so-and-so at the store. I just learned this new thing. Let's talk about it. We change the culture when we talk about things that are uncomfortable.
Thank you, Dion. Thank you so much also to all of our panelists. We appreciate everyone sharing your experiences and expertise with us tonight. As Dion just mentioned, we do have that feedback form that Barbara is placing in the chat. So if you could please take a few minutes to fill that out, it really helps us improve and plan these events. And then just as a reminder, we have many free peer-led programs for individuals living with mental illness and their loved ones. If you or someone you know could benefit from any additional support, please check out our website, www.NAMI-NYC.org/find support. Thank you again for being here. The recording will be put up on YouTube in the next couple of days, and you'll all receive a follow-up email with resources, the recording, and the evaluation link.